On this episode of China Uncensored, China's on a shopping spree down under. G'day mate, welcome to China Uncensored. I'm your host Chris Chappell. Now at first glance, China and Australia might seem like they don't have all that much in common. But really, they have so much in common. Australia is known for its exotic animal life, and so is China. Australia has dangerous beaches, and so does China. Australia's iconic bear isn't actually a bear, and neither is China's. What's that, Shelley? The giant panda is actually a bear after all. Thanks for ruining everything. Anyway, with so much other stuff they have in common, it's unsurprising that both countries have pledged to deepen bilateral relations. In fact, China is already Australia's biggest trading partner. Australian exports of iron ore, coal, and natural gas make up a huge part of it. So the economy of Australia is deeply tied to its relationship with China. What could go wrong? I mean, Chinese state media says it's a win-win. But more and more, concerns are being raised that the Chinese Communist Party is waging a covert campaign of influence in Australia, an aggressive form of soft power, and while loyalists are rewarded, dissidents live in fear. Because as you may have noticed from watching this show, the Chinese regime has a long reach. This is Chen Yonglin. He was the Chinese consul for political affairs in Sydney until he defected in 2005. He said he had knowledge of more than 1,000 Chinese agents operating in Australia. One of their tasks was kidnapping Chinese nationals and sending them back to China. After he defected, he said his source inside China warned him the CCP sent an assassination squad after him. They failed, but recently he said the number of agents in Australia has only increased. How is it the Chinese Communist Party feels like it can get away with this? Money. The Chinese regime has been gradually buying influence in Australia, and today I'm just going to focus on politics, but there is so much more. Unlike the US, Australia has very few campaign finance restrictions. For example, foreign political donations are perfectly legal. I know what you're thinking. It's like when you're watching a movie and the car full of attractive young people, or in this case, middle-aged Australian politicians, breaks down in front of a creepy abandoned house. And you start yelling, "Don't go into the house!" And of course, they go into the house. This is Australia's former Transport Minister, Andrew Robb. He's a member of the Liberal Party, which, despite its name, is the equivalent of the Republican Party in the US or the Conservative Party in the UK. Things are different down under. Anyway, Robb was responsible for a major free trade agreement with China in 2014. The day it was signed, several influential Chinese businessmen donated 50,000 Australian dollars to his campaign. And a few days later, he took an insanely lucrative part-time job as a consultant to a Chinese billionaire, Ye Cheng. A billionaire who just happens to be a member of the Chinese government's main advisory body. This is Australian Labor Party politician Eric Rosendahl. The Labor Party is the major Liberal party in Australia. In 2013, he resigned to take an executive job at a property development company owned by a different Chinese billionaire, Huang Xiangmo, who also has Chinese government connections. But how could Rosendahl just resign and abandon his public duties, you ask? Don't worry. 3 weeks later, Huang Xiangmo's friend nabbed up Rosendahl's vacant council seat. And hey, you know how the Chinese regime has been building fake islands in the South China Sea and putting weapons on them? Well, it upset a lot of people in Australia's Labor Party. But not Senator Sam Dastyari. He told the Chinese media that Australia shouldn't interfere with China's activities in the South China Sea. And during Senate proceedings in 2014, Dastyari said this:
that the strong and enduring relationship and friendship between both the governments of China and Australia is something we can rightly be very proud of.
Yes, I bet he's very proud of the 5,000 Australian dollar contribution he got from Chinese billionaire Huang Xiangmo. I assume he's also proud of the $1,600 he received from another Chinese businessman with links to the Chinese government. Again, this is perfectly legal under Australian law. though it is perhaps a bit outside voter expectations. So this seems concerning, you say, but the donations don't seem to be that large. Maybe the house isn't haunted after all. Well, a 6-month joint investigation by Australian media companies Fairfax Media and Four Corners found that in 4 years, Huang Xiangmo gave almost $2.7 million to the 3 biggest Australian political parties. And yet another Chinese billionaire, who has possible connections to the Chinese Communist Party, donated $4.1 million over 10 years. So yeah, the house is pretty haunted. But I'm not done. This is Bob Carr, former Minister of Foreign Affairs. He stepped down from office in 2013, and the next year founded a think tank with the help of a $1.8 million donation from our billionaire friend, Huang Xiangmo. What's wrong with starting a think tank? Well, it has been accused of operating as a China propaganda arm. Which is ridiculous. He's just trying to help Australians get a better understanding of China, especially the media.
Recently, 6 journalists were brought to Beijing by former Foreign Minister Bob Carr on a trip sponsored by the Communist Party's All China Journalists Association.
Yes, the Chinese Communist Party is also buying influence in Australian media, but that's a whole other topic. The good thing is, they haven't bought influence in all Australian media. Now you may be wondering, while this was happening, did anyone notice? Was no one telling these politicians to get out of the haunted house? Well, back in May, the head of the Australian Security Intelligence Organisation, or ASIO, which is Australia's equivalent of the Department of Homeland Security, warned that foreign interference in Australia was increasing on an unprecedented scale. And then the media investigation I mentioned earlier uncovered that ASIO had explicitly warned the political parties that taking money from these Chinese billionaires was an issue back in 2015. And then after the warning, the political parties kept on taking money from Chinese billionaires. So ASIO was screaming at the politicians to leave the house, and they decided to stay instead, which is not going well for them. But the good news is, in light of this political donation scandal, the Australian government is considering reforming their foreign interference laws. Maybe they can stop other people from going in the house. So what do you think of the Chinese Communist Party's influence on Australian politics? Leave your comments below. Once again, I'm your host, Chris Chappell. See you next time.